She was the one who noticed first. Not the doctor, not the neighbors, not even her father's other children. She noticed he asked the same question 3 times during a single phone call. She noticed he seemed to need her to decide things he used to decide in seconds. She noticed the small, quiet shift, long before anyone else in the family believed her. By the time the rest of the family agreed something was wrong, she had already been watching it happen for over a year. This is one of the most overlooked truths about early dementia. The primary caregiver almost always sees it first, not because they are trained to look for it, but because they are the one person paying close enough attention every single day to notice what everyone else misses. Today we are covering 10 early dementia signs that caregivers notice first, the quiet clues that show up in daily caregiving long before a formal diagnosis. And by the end of this video you may recognize something you have already been seeing without having the words for it until now. Welcome back. If you are the person in your family who handles the appointments, the medications, the phone calls, and the small daily check-ins, this video is speaking directly to you. Caregivers occupy a unique position. They are close enough to notice subtle change, but often too close to trust their own observation. Am I imagining this? Is one of the most common thoughts caregivers describe having, months or even years before a diagnosis is ever made. Here is what research and clinical experience both confirm. Caregivers are frequently the first to notice cognitive changes, precisely because they are present for the small, repeated moments that reveal a pattern, moments a doctor sees for 15 minutes twice a year could never catch. Today we are going through the signs caregivers notice first, clearly and honestly. Stay through to sign number 4, because it is the one caregivers describe most often, and yet almost never mention to a doctor, because it feels too small to bring up. Let's begin. Sign 1. Subtle repetition in conversation. We start with the sign nearly every caregiver eventually recognizes, once they know to look for it. Caregivers spend more time in ongoing conversation with their loved one than almost anyone else. This means they are the first to notice when a question gets asked again within the same conversation, not once but 2 or 3 times, sometimes within minutes. A sibling visiting for a single afternoon might miss this entirely. A caregiver hearing it every day cannot. At first it is easy to explain away. Everyone repeats themselves occasionally, but caregivers often describe a growing uneasy sense that this is happening more often and more quickly after the first answer than normal forgetfulness would explain. This pattern is subtle precisely because it hides inside completely ordinary conversation. It rarely feels dramatic in the moment. It simply accumulates day after day until the caregiver realizes they have been quietly tracking it without even meaning to. Comment below if you have caught yourself mentally counting how many times a question has been repeated, because you are far from the only one. And that instinct to notice is worth trusting. Sign 2. Increased reliance on the caregiver for small decisions. The second sign is one that develops so gradually, caregivers often cannot pinpoint exactly when it began. A loved one who once decided things instantly, what to wear, what to eat, which route to take, starts turning to the caregiver for these small decisions instead. What do you think I should have for lunch? Should I wear this or that? At first, this feels like simple companionship, 2 people making decisions together. But caregivers often notice the shift is not mutual. It is becoming one-directional. This growing reliance is subtle because it can look like closeness rather than decline. The caregiver becomes the default decision-maker for smaller and smaller choices, absorbing this responsibility so gradually that the shift can go unnamed for months, even while the caregiver is quietly making dozens of small decisions a day that once were not theirs to make. If you have noticed yourself making decisions for a loved one that used to be entirely their own, it is worth pausing to ask when and how gradually that shift actually happened. Sign 3. Difficulty following multi-step instructions. The third sign often shows up during the most ordinary caregiving moments, giving simple instructions. A caregiver might say, "Go get your jacket, put on your shoes, and meet me by the door." Once, this instruction would have been followed without a second thought. Now, the person may complete the first step, then pause, seeming to lose track of what comes next. Caregivers often find themselves breaking instructions into smaller and smaller single steps, without fully realizing they have already adapted their entire communication style around this change. This adjustment happens so naturally that caregivers frequently do not recognize it as a response to a symptom. It simply becomes how we do things now. It is only when someone else, a substitute caregiver, a visiting relative, tries giving the original 3-step instruction and watches it fail, that the pattern becomes visible from the outside. And here is sign number 4. The one caregivers notice constantly and almost never think to mention at a doctor's appointment because it feels too personal, too small, or too embarrassing to say out loud. Sign 4. Subtle irritability, directed specifically at the caregiver. This sign is one of the most emotionally complicated on this list because it is often aimed squarely at the person working hardest to help. Caregivers frequently notice a loved one becoming disproportionately irritated with them specifically, snapping at a gentle reminder, growing frustrated during routine caregiving tasks, or reacting sharply to help that would have been welcomed without complaint a year earlier. Meanwhile, the same person may remain entirely pleasant with a visiting friend, a doctor, or a stranger. This is not personal, even though it deeply feels that way. Caregivers are often the person a loved one feels safest expressing frustration toward, precisely because the relationship is secure enough to withstand it. It is also frequently a sign of the person's own growing frustration with themselves, redirected outward at the one person close enough to receive it. Caregivers rarely bring this up to a doctor because it feels like a relationship problem rather than a medical one. But this pattern, warmth toward outsiders, irritability toward the primary caregiver, is one of the most consistently reported early signs among caregivers once they are finally asked directly about it. If this sign sounds painfully familiar, please know that it is not a reflection of your relationship falling apart. It may be one of the clearest signals you've been carrying all along. Sign 5. Quiet withdrawal from collaborative activities. The fifth and final sign shows up in the small shared rituals that once defined the relationship between caregiver and loved one. A daily crossword done together. A weekly grocery trip where opinions were debated over every item. A shared television show, discussed in detail afterward. Caregivers often notice these shared activities quietly shrinking, not stopping all at once but becoming shorter, less engaged, more passive over time. The caregiver may find themselves doing more and more of the actual thinking during these once collaborative moments, while their loved one nods along or defers entirely. This shift can be one of the loneliest signs for a caregiver to notice, because it changes the texture of the relationship itself, long before it changes anything visible to an outside observer. Recognizing this pattern is not about grieving what is being lost. It is about understanding that this quiet withdrawal is often one of the very first threads connecting daily life to a medical explanation that deserves real attention. Together, these 5 signs form a pattern that caregivers are uniquely positioned to notice, often years before anyone else in the family, and sometimes even before the person experiencing the changes fully recognizes it in themselves. Now let me speak directly to you, the caregiver, for a moment. If you recognize yourself in this video, if you've been quietly tracking these small signs, wondering if you are imagining things, please trust what you have been noticing. Caregivers are not overreacting when they raise these concerns. They are often the single most reliable early warning system a family has. You do not need dramatic evidence to bring your observations to a doctor. You need exactly what you already have, specific examples noticed over time by the person who spends the most time paying attention. That is not a small thing. That is often the most valuable piece of information in the entire evaluation process. Here is your one action for today. Write down 2 or 3 specific moments from the past month that reflect any of these 5 signs, with rough dates if you can remember them. Bring that list to your loved one's next appointment, even if nothing else about the visit seems urgent. If this video helped you feel less alone in what you have been noticing, please hit the like button. It helps this reach the caregivers who need to hear it most. Subscribe so you never miss a video in this series. We cover everything from early warning signs to caregiving strategies to the latest in Alzheimer's research. Share this video with another caregiver in your life who may be quietly noticing changes and wondering if they are imagining things. They are probably not. Drop a comment below and tell me, which of these 5 signs did you notice first? Your answer might be exactly what helps another caregiver trust their own instincts today. Thank you for being here, and thank you for everything you do. I will see you in the next one.